The room was filled with the soft hum of the machines, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat monitoring the baby's every move. As the midwife prepared for the final stages of a typical delivery, she couldn't have prepared herself for what was about to happen. In a single, heart-stopping moment, the fate of both mother and child would be forever changed, and the midwife would be left staring in disbelief at what she had just pulled out from the womb. A small life, yes, but not in the way anyone had ever expected. What she discovered next would shock even the most seasoned medical professionals. It was supposed to be just another routine delivery. The midwife, Linda, had seen countless births throughout her career. Each one was special in its own right, of course, but she had grown accustomed to the rhythm and the expectations of what would unfold in the sterile yet comforting atmosphere of the delivery room. The sound of the fetal monitor beeping in a steady rhythm, the soft rustling of nurses preparing the room, and the anxious but hopeful expressions of the parents-to-be filled the air. But this one was different. Linda had worked through the night, her energy waning but her focus sharp. She had been briefed on the mother's medical history, a seemingly straightforward case. The woman, Rachel, was young and healthy, expecting her first child, and everything up until now had been typical. The pregnancy had progressed without complications, and all signs pointed to a smooth delivery. It was a textbook case, or so it seemed. As the contractions grew more frequent and intense, Linda guided Rachel through her breathing exercises, offering encouraging words. The tension in the room was palpable, but Linda's years of experience allowed her to remain calm and collected. It was a dance she had performed countless times, one that never got easier, yet never lost its sense of wonder. And with the baby's head crowning, Linda took a deep breath and steeled herself for the final push. The room fell silent, save for the soft sound of Rachel's labored breathing and the occasional encouraging murmur from the nurses. Linda could feel the anticipation building. This was the moment when everything would change. The culmination of months of waiting, a life about to begin. But then, something unexpected happened. As Linda guided the baby's head through the birth canal, she immediately sensed that something was off. The usual resistance wasn't there. It wasn't the typical ease or struggle of a normal delivery. There was a strange, unfamiliar sensation, a shift in the expected rhythm. For a moment, Linda thought she might have misjudged the situation, but as the baby's body began to emerge, her heart skipped a beat. The sight that greeted her wasn't what she had anticipated. The room seemed to pause, as if time itself had momentarily stopped. Linda's hands trembled ever so slightly, the reality of what she was seeing slowly sinking in. It couldn't be. No, this wasn't possible. The baby, yes, but something was wrong, something was off. It wasn't just the usual surprise of a difficult delivery or a slightly unusual birth position. This was different. Deeply, unsettlingly different. As the midwife pulled the newborn into the world, her mind raced to comprehend the gravity of the situation. What she had just pulled from the womb was not just unexpected, it was beyond anything she had ever witnessed in her years of service. Something that no training, no book, and no one had ever prepared her for. It was an anomaly, something so rare and inexplicable it left Linda questioning everything she thought she knew about childbirth. The room filled with stunned silence. The nurses froze in place, unable to process the scene unfolding before them. The parents, who had been anxiously awaiting the arrival of their child, looked at Linda with confusion and growing concern. The midwife's mind raced as she tried to piece together what had just happened. The air in the delivery room was thick with tension. Linda, the midwife, had worked long hours in the field, and after years of helping bring babies into the world, she had developed an instinct for knowing how things would unfold. Her hands were steady, her movements practiced, and her demeanor calm as she helped Rachel, the young mother, breathe through another round of painful contractions. At first, it seemed like just another routine delivery. Rachel was in her early 20s, fit, healthy, and there were no signs of complications. The ultrasound had shown that everything was progressing normally. It was a perfect pregnancy. No reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. The contractions were becoming more frequent, and the time had come for Rachel to push. Linda positioned herself carefully, watching Rachel's progress. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the overhead lights creating a quiet, serene atmosphere. The nurses hovered nearby, ready to assist. Linda gently coached Rachel, her voice soothing and encouraging, as the mother-to-be pushed through the intense pain. The room filled with the sound of Rachel's labored breaths and soft murmurs of encouragement from the nurses. But then it started, an odd, unfamiliar sensation. Linda's hand, steady as it was, could feel a change in the usual pattern of the delivery. It wasn't the expected resistance that usually accompanies the delivery of a newborn. Something felt wrong. The tension in the air shifted, and Linda's experienced instincts immediately warned her that this was not going to be a straightforward birth. Rachel, her face flushed with exhaustion, let out a soft cry of discomfort. "What's happening? Why isn't it coming out?" she gasped. Linda forced herself to maintain her calm, but the feeling of unease began to creep in. The baby's head should have been crowning by now, but it wasn't. Linda took a quick glance at the fetal monitor, which was still showing steady, reassuring readings. The baby's heart rate was stable. So why wasn't the birth progressing as expected? Linda's thoughts raced. She had delivered hundreds of babies over the years, each with its own challenges, but nothing like this. Something was blocking the progress, but what? She gently shifted positions, carefully guiding Rachel's legs and asking her to push harder. As the minutes ticked by, the midwife's mind continued to race. What was happening inside that was causing this delay? Was there an obstruction? A cord wrapped around the baby's neck? Or was it simply that the baby had turned in an unusual position? Suddenly, Rachel let out a piercing scream. It wasn't just the pain. There was fear in her voice now. "Please, what's happening? Is my baby okay?" Rachel's panic was starting to seep into Linda's own thoughts, but she couldn't let it show. She had to remain calm, no matter what. Linda signaled for the nurses to bring in the obstetrician. She was trained to handle most situations herself, but something about this delivery felt different. It wasn't just a case of a difficult birth. It was as though the very laws of nature were being challenged. The doctor arrived quickly, but Linda had already made the decision. She would attempt to reposition the baby one last time. She felt around carefully, applying just the right amount of pressure, trying to coax the baby into the correct position. But as she did, the strangest sensation occurred. It was as if there was something more than just a baby. A heavy silence fell in the room. The other nurses exchanged confused glances, unsure of what was happening. Linda's heart raced as she carefully felt around, trying to assess the situation. She could still feel the baby, but there was something unexpected, a foreign mass that should not have been there. It wasn't the usual fluid or tissue that sometimes accompanied childbirth. This was something else entirely. Linda's breathing became shallow as she tried to make sense of the situation. It was as if her brain couldn't process the information. Everything she had been taught, everything she had learned from decades of practice, was telling her that something was wrong, but no medical book had ever prepared her for this. The clock ticked loudly in her ears, and Rachel's breathing grew more erratic. She was scared now, and the fear in her voice was starting to break Linda's calm exterior. "Linda, what's wrong? Is my baby okay? Please tell me." Linda forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to regain control of her racing thoughts. The doctor hovered over her shoulder, sensing the shift in the room. The baby's head had emerged partway, but Linda was unable to pull the baby out. There was something obstructing the way, and then it hit her. The baby was not alone. In a split second of realization, Linda knew. The mass she had felt was not just an unusual part of the birth. It was part of the baby's body itself. But that was impossible. Babies were born with only the usual appendages and features. What Linda had just felt was beyond anything she had ever encountered. The truth was undeniable. It was then that Linda pulled the baby out fully, but what emerged from Rachel's body left her breathless. This was no ordinary birth. It was something extraordinary. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls of the delivery room pressing in on her as her eyes widened in disbelief. The nurses gasped, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Rachel, too, looked up in confusion and shock. The delivery was far from over, and the world outside the delivery room would soon be shaken by what had just happened. The conflict had only just begun. What Linda had pulled out during that delivery would send shockwaves through the hospital and change Rachel's life and Linda's own career forever. What was it that she had just brought into the world, and how would they all face the consequences of what had just occurred? Linda stood frozen in place, her heart racing as she held the baby in her hands. The room had fallen into a stunned silence, broken only by the soft sound of Rachel's labored breathing. The delivery, which had seemed so routine just moments ago, had taken a terrifying, inexplicable turn. The baby, or rather, what she had just pulled from Rachel's body, was unlike anything she had ever encountered in her years of experience as a midwife. At first, she had been so focused on the baby's head crowning that she hadn't fully realized the magnitude of the situation. But as she carefully maneuvered the baby into the world, Linda could feel it. A strange resistance, a heaviness that should not have been there. She had thought it was an anomaly at first, a complication, something that could be easily resolved. But now, with the baby in her hands, she could feel the weight of it settle on her chest like a terrible burden. The doctor was still standing at her side, but Linda barely noticed him. She had gone into autopilot mode, doing everything by instinct as she checked the baby's vitals and attempted to process what had just occurred. But the sense of unease was undeniable. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and Linda couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had just uncovered a mystery far bigger than herself. The baby's body, though seemingly healthy, was not the only thing that had emerged from Rachel's womb. There was something else, something tangled, strange, almost otherworldly in its appearance. It was hard to describe, but Linda knew one thing for sure: it didn't belong. It was as though the very essence of life had taken a different form, something neither biological nor expected in the world of childbirth. Rachel, still lying on the table, was beginning to panic. Her breathing was growing erratic, and she was looking from Linda to the doctor with wide eyes. "What is that? What is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Linda, trying to maintain her composure, turned to the doctor, silently pleading for him to step in. But even he seemed momentarily paralyzed by the situation. He had witnessed hundreds of births, but nothing like this. Linda's mind was racing as she considered the possibilities. Was this a genetic anomaly, a birth defect that had gone unnoticed until now? She had heard of rare cases, of children born with extra limbs or strange growths, but this was different. This felt unnatural. The baby was still breathing, its heart still beating, but Linda couldn't dismiss the feeling that maybe they were standing at the edge of something beyond their understanding. "Doctor, we need to assess the situation," Linda said, her voice firm despite the panic that was creeping into her thoughts. "Get a team in here, now." But before the doctor could respond, Rachel's voice interrupted, more insistent now. "Why isn't anyone telling me what's happening? Is my baby okay? What's that?" she cried, pointing at the object that had been pulled from her. Linda swallowed hard. She knew she had to answer Rachel, but the truth was too complicated, too unexplainable to put into words. Rachel, just try to stay calm. We're doing everything we can. We'll take care of you and the baby. Everything is going to be okay, Linda said, her words coming out more like a prayer than a reassurance. But deep down, Linda knew that the path forward was not going to be simple. There were too many unknowns. The object she had pulled out, what was it? Why was it here? And how would it affect Rachel's recovery and the baby's future? Could anyone in the hospital handle a situation like this? Could she? The rising panic in the room was palpable. The nurses, who had been quiet until now, exchanged nervous glances. They had all seen their fair share of complications in childbirth, but nothing like this. One nurse stepped forward, attempting to comfort Rachel, while another stood near the door, ready to alert the hospital's higher-ups. The tension was thick, and every passing second felt like a countdown to something that no one was prepared for. Linda's thoughts spiraled as she tried to steady herself. She had always prided herself on being calm under pressure, on handling whatever came her way. But this was something entirely outside of her control. She had pulled a child into the world, yes, but there was something else she hadn't been trained for, something that made everything else feel like a distant memory. The fear in Rachel's eyes only added to the weight of the situation, and Linda knew she couldn't afford to lose her composure now. As the doctor hurried to fetch a team to examine the baby and the mysterious object, Linda turned back to Rachel, who was now starting to cry. "It's okay, Rachel," she said, though her voice trembled. "We're going to take care of everything. You've done great. You're strong. You just need to rest now." Rachel didn't respond, her sobs only growing louder. The mother was terrified, and Linda could understand why. This was not what anyone had expected. There were so many questions, so many unknowns. The delivery had become a nightmare, not just for Rachel, but for everyone in the room. The strange object still lay on the table, a silent witness to the chaos that was unfolding. Linda had faced countless challenges in her career, but none of them had prepared her for this moment. This wasn't just a complicated birth or a rare condition. This was something that defied all medical logic. And as she glanced down at the baby, still safe in her arms, she couldn't help but wonder, was this a miracle or a curse? Her mind raced for answers, but deep down, Linda knew that whatever happened next, it would change her life and Rachel's forever. There was no turning back. The path ahead was uncertain, and the obstacles were only beginning to reveal themselves. And as the minutes ticked by, Linda could feel the weight of what had just occurred pressing down on her, harder with every passing second. The real journey was just beginning, and no one knew where it would lead. The hospital was eerily quiet now, the rush of activity that had filled the room only moments ago slowly fading into a dull hum. The chaos that had erupted when Linda pulled the object from Rachel's womb had subsided, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Outside the delivery room, the usual bustle of nurses and doctors had all but ceased, as though the entire hospital had been put on hold, waiting for an explanation that no one had yet been able to provide. Rachel, still in her hospital bed, clutched her newborn baby to her chest, but there was a lingering unease in her eyes, a suspicion that perhaps the worst was yet to come. The specialists had come and gone, offering only vague reassurances, and though they had promised to continue investigating the anomaly, the reality was that no one had any real answers. Linda stood by the window, looking out at the rain that had started falling heavily outside. It was a strange comfort to her, the way the droplets splattered against the glass, as if the world outside still carried on, unaffected by the madness that had unfolded inside the delivery room. But deep down, Linda knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. She had been a midwife for over 15 years, and in that time she had encountered nearly every possible complication, from breech births to complicated deliveries. But nothing had prepared her for this. The object, the thing she had pulled from Rachel, was beyond anything she had ever seen in her career. No textbook, no medical journal, no amount of training could have prepared her for the sight of it. And now she found herself haunted by it. Even though the doctors had reassured Rachel that her baby was healthy, there was still an undeniable sense of dread. The questions remained. What had she really delivered? What was that object? And what did it mean for the baby? As Linda mulled over these questions, she felt an unexpected weight settle on her chest. It wasn't just the burden of the mystery, but the weight of her own actions. Was there something she could have done differently? Was there a way she could have caught this sooner? Or was this just something that was beyond anyone's control? A soft knock at the door broke Linda from her thoughts. She turned to see Dr. Clara entering the room, her expression no longer one of uncertainty, but one of quiet determination. The team had been working nonstop, trying to find some answers, and Linda had a feeling that the moment she had been dreading was finally here. "Linda," Dr. Clara began, her voice calm but filled with the gravity of what she was about to say. "We've completed some preliminary tests on the object, and we've confirmed something unexpected. It's not what we thought it was. It's not a growth, and it's not a birth defect. It's biologically foreign, but it seems to be connected to the baby in a way we can't fully understand yet." Linda felt her breath catch in her throat. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means we have more questions than answers," Dr. Clara replied. "But it also means that Rachel's baby is healthy. Physically, it's fine. The anomaly we saw, it doesn't seem to be harmful, at least not immediately." Linda felt a small breath of relief escape her, but the feeling was fleeting. "But what about the rest? The object, what does it signify? Is it some kind of medical anomaly, or is this something completely different?" Dr. Clara hesitated. "We're not sure, but we've made a decision. We're going to continue studying it. We can't make any conclusions right now, but we believe it's important to keep an open mind." The words echoed in Linda's mind. Keep an open mind. It felt like a dismissal, as if they were asking her to let go of the questions and accept uncertainty as the new normal. But Linda wasn't sure she could do that. How could she just accept something so inexplicable, so unfathomable? Dr. Clara seemed to sense her inner conflict. "I know this is difficult," she said softly, "but sometimes the unknown is all we're left with. We have to trust that what we don't understand now will make sense in time." Linda didn't respond immediately. She turned back toward the window, watching the rain pour down in sheets. She thought of Rachel, lying in that bed, her baby in her arms. Rachel had been through so much, so many hours of labor, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty. And now, here they were, standing on the edge of something that could change everything. She knew that the true resolution of this story wouldn't come today. It wouldn't come tomorrow. The answers were still out there, tangled in the threads of science, medicine, and maybe something more. Linda understood that now. Sometimes the answers didn't come right away. Sometimes they took years to uncover. Or maybe they never came at all. And so, Linda chose to focus on the one thing she did know for sure. Rachel's baby was alive, healthy, strong, and Rachel herself was starting to recover from the shock. That, at least, was something to be thankful for. The storm outside seemed to be easing, and the tension in the room began to lift ever so slightly. The air felt lighter now, though still thick with the weight of the unknown. But Linda understood that this was how life worked. Unpredictable, sometimes messy, and often incomprehensible. But in the end, It was about what you did with the knowledge you had and how you faced the uncertainty. As Linda finally turned to face Dr. Clara, she found herself nodding. "Keep an open mind," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she could fully embrace it just yet. But for Rachel's sake, she had to try. Sometimes not all mysteries could be solved right away, but they would keep searching. They had to. And so the story would continue, not with final answers, but with the hope that time would eventually reveal the truth. The baby, the object, the strange series of events, there was more to uncover. But for now, all Linda could do was trust in the unknown and in the promise that one day things would make sense. And that was enough. As the room settled into an uneasy quiet, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that the story she had just witnessed was far from over. The midwife's hands were trembling slightly as she glanced once more at the object she had removed from Rachel during the delivery. The mystery surrounding it seemed to grow with every passing second, and it was clear that the answers, if they existed, were nowhere near being uncovered. But what was undeniable was the fact that this event had shaken the very foundation of what Linda thought she knew about childbirth, about the human body, and about the mysteries that lay beneath the surface of everyday life. Linda's mind raced with questions, and she wasn't alone. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that there were so many others who would wonder about the same thing. What had happened during that delivery? Rachel, despite her exhaustion, couldn't stop asking, why? What was it? What does it mean for my baby? And yet, no one could answer. They were all left with more questions than solutions. Was it a birth defect? A rare medical anomaly? Or something else altogether? Each possibility brought its own wave of anxiety and fear. The answers felt distant, just beyond reach, as though hidden behind a veil that no one could lift. As the story unfolded, Linda began to wonder how many people around the world had faced similar mysteries. Was this a freak occurrence, or were there other instances where something unexplainable had been discovered during childbirth? Had there been other stories, similar to Rachel's, that were tucked away in the shadows of medical history, never shared with the wider world? Linda wasn't just looking for closure for herself. She knew there were countless others out there who had experienced baffling, perplexing, and even life-altering moments like this. There were people who had witnessed the unimaginable in their own lives, whether it was a birth defect, a supernatural experience, or something that simply couldn't be explained by science. The truth was, these things often go untold, hidden away by fear, confusion, and the uncertainty that accompanies the unknown. This was where Linda realized that her story, Rachel's story, could serve as a call for others to come forward, to share their own experiences, no matter how bizarre or strange they seemed. There was power in numbers, in stories, in the shared human experience. Linda had always been a listener in her profession, taking care to listen to the fears and anxieties of the families she worked with. But now, she found herself wondering, what if this story could help someone else? What if sharing it could make others feel less alone, less afraid of what they didn't understand? It wasn't just a question of what had happened to Rachel. It was about what could happen next. What did the future hold for the baby? Would the mystery ever be solved? Could this be something more than just a medical anomaly? The uncertainty was daunting, but in some ways, it opened up an entire realm of possibilities. And so Linda decided that it was time to ask the question that she had been asking herself over and over in the quiet corners of her mind. What do you believe? What did the people reading this story think? Could there be an explanation that had yet to be uncovered? Did anyone else have a similar experience, a similar mystery that had yet to be solved? What was the truth behind the strange event in that delivery room? This was where the power of storytelling came into play. It wasn't just about Linda's experience or Rachel's confusion. It was about the collective wisdom and experiences of everyone who had ever faced the unknown. Every person had a story. Every story had the potential to help others understand, heal, or find the answers they were looking for. Linda knew that people would have opinions. Some would have logical explanations, others might speculate about supernatural causes, but in the end, it was the conversation, the exchange of ideas, that mattered the most. She wanted to hear from others. She wanted to know if anyone had witnessed something similar, or if anyone had found answers to their own mysteries that had once seemed impossible to solve. And so Linda decided to open the door for others to share. She would speak to the world, asking not only for answers, but for shared experiences, for the collective wisdom that might illuminate the way forward. As the hospital lights flickered overhead, Linda took one last look at Rachel and her baby. They had been through something extraordinary, something that none of them could explain. But Linda. The room was heavy with tension, as though the very air had thickened in the wake of what had just occurred. Rachel's sobs filled the silence, echoing off the sterile white walls of the delivery room. Linda could barely hear the sound of the baby's heartbeat now, though she was sure it was still there. Faint, but steady, her hands trembled as she held the infant against her chest, unable to shake the overwhelming sense of dread that had settled deep within her bones. The object, the thing she had pulled out, lay on the table covered in sterile cloth, but Linda couldn't bring herself to look at it again. Her mind kept flashing back to the moment it had been born, the moment she had realized something was wrong. At first, she had assumed it was a complication, maybe a rare growth, maybe a birth defect. But as she'd drawn the baby into the world, she had realized it was much, much more. The doctor, still fumbling with his gloves, had yet to speak. His eyes were locked on the object, a look of disbelief on his face. Linda couldn't decipher the expression, but she knew what he was thinking. The same thing she was. This wasn't a simple case. There was no explanation for what they had just witnessed. And as the minutes ticked by, the weight of the unknown crushed down on everyone in the room. Rachel had grown quieter now, her hands clutching the sheets in a tight, desperate grip, her eyes wide with fear. The shock was beginning to wear off and panic was setting in. Her body was shaking, her breath shallow. "Is my baby okay?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible. Linda's heart tightened. She knew the answer she wanted to give. She wanted to say, "Yes, Rachel, everything is fine. Your baby is healthy." But she couldn't. Not yet. The silence was broken by the door opening. A team of specialists had arrived, all of them dressed in blue scrubs, their faces serious as they rushed toward the bed. The lead specialist, a woman named Dr. Clara, immediately took charge. Her gaze flicked between Linda, the baby, and the object on the table before she began speaking in rapid-fire instructions to the rest of the team. It was clear she wasn't surprised, but neither was she calm. Her face betrayed a mix of concern and urgency. Linda could see the same look in the eyes of the nurses around her. They were all bracing for something bigger than they had ever encountered. The baby was now lying on a separate examination table, and the specialists quickly began checking its vitals. Linda stood frozen by the side, clutching Rachel's hand, not daring to speak, as Dr. Clara moved toward the mysterious object. It had been hidden beneath a sterile cloth, but even from the distance, Linda could see it glistening in the harsh fluorescent light of the room, as though it were somehow alive. Rachel, sensing the change in the atmosphere, turned to Linda with a pleading look. "Please, what is it? What's happening?" she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through Linda like a knife. The tension was suffocating. Linda looked at the doctor, her own heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she could even begin to explain what was happening. Her mind raced, desperate for an explanation that made sense. But nothing made sense. Not the object, not the baby, not the sudden terror that had taken hold of the room. Dr. Clara approached the object, her hand steady, but her eyes filled with something Linda could only describe as awe. She took a deep breath, carefully lifting the cloth to reveal what lay underneath. The room seemed to hold its breath as everyone stared, their faces frozen in shock. There, lying in front of them, was something that defied all logic. It was not a growth, not a tumor, not even a rare birth defect. It was something altogether different. The shape, the texture, it was almost unearthly, alien. It shimmered under the light, its surface slick and smooth. But the deeper Linda looked, the more impossible it seemed. It wasn't a part of the baby. It was a part of something entirely new. Dr. Clara took another step back, her eyes widening in disbelief. I don't know what this is," she said, her voice hoarse, tinged with both fear and awe. This isn't a medical anomaly. This is something else entirely." Linda's throat tightened. She felt as though the world around her was spinning. She had always prided herself on being able to handle any delivery, no matter how complicated. But this was beyond her. Rachel let out a strangled cry, looking between the doctor and Linda. "What are you saying? What is it? Is my baby okay? Please, I need to know." Dr. Clara's face had gone pale, but she regained some composure before speaking again. "Rachel, we need to conduct further tests, but right now we don't have an explanation for this. We'll do everything we can to figure out what happened." The room was still, the weight of the unknown hanging over them like a storm cloud. Linda wanted to speak, wanted to reassure Rachel, but she couldn't. The baby, the object, the fear. It was all too much. She had no words for what was happening. And then, just as Linda thought the chaos couldn't get any worse, the baby let out a strange, high-pitched cry. It wasn't a typical newborn wail. It was different, almost mechanical. It sent a chill through Linda's spine, and she could see that the doctors and nurses around her were visibly shaken. This was no ordinary birth. This was something else. The truth, whatever it was coming, and no one was prepared for the reality that awaited them. The climax of the story had arrived, unexplainable, terrifying, and far more intense than any of them had imagined.